Hello and welcome to part 3 of Games with FlashPunk, a video lesson series on Decode. Now, what we've been doing so far is trying to make a game with FlashPunk, and what we did last lesson was actually start drawing and sort ourselves out with entities and worlds, the finished product of which was what you see right here in front of you. We managed to get this person drawn in the middle of the screen. Now what we want to do today is add some true interactivity and make it so we can move this guy around. And that's not so complicated. We'll get right into it and we'll be able to move him around with the arrow keys and do a few other things with a few other keys as well. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use this update function properly. What we did with the update function last time was we put this trace in to establish the idea that it's executed at every update, roughly 30 times per second in the case of this game. Now, what we're going to do now is check for the press of a key every time it updates. And if that key is being pressed, we're going to move the player. And we'll get to doing that. First, we have to import 2 new classes. Now, I'll explain how these work later, but the first thing we have to do is import this first one called input. It's in keyboard or mouse input, and it works out that's net.flashpunk.utils.input, and let the autocomplete do it for me, semicolon import. The other one we have to import is called key, net.flashpunk, I'll write it out myself, .utils.key, and that's another really important class. It's worth noting here that I'm in our player.as class in Flash Develop. Okay, so we've imported those 2 classes. And what we're going to do is we're going to use an if statement. And I'll just go over how an if statement works again. Now, basically, it's if this, then do that. And that's all there is to it. So we're going to type if, then an expression. Now, here's where that first new class comes in, input. Now, input has a bunch of functions that lets us check for things, like this check function. And this basically checks if a key is being pressed. And it will return true if it is. Then we want to use this key class now. Basically, the key class stores a whole lot of key codes for a bunch of different keys. Now, for example, I want to check if the right key is being pressed. I press and I type out right, and you'll see here that the value of right is actually 39. Now, that is because every key on your keyboard is actually represented by a numerical code in the way that the computer thinks about it. And what this class allows us to do is bridge the gap between how we think about keys and how the computer thinks about keys. So I'm going to press enter, key.write, I'm going to close those brackets off, and then I'm going to open up the curly brace, and in this is the code that will be executed when the right key is being held down. So I'm going to type out x plus equals 5. And what we're saying is add 5 to x. And it's interesting to note here that if 5 is being added to x every update, and it's being updated about 30 times per second, what you get is 5 times 30, 150 pixels being moved every second. Now it's, again, x is the x coordinate of the player, so when we change the value of x, the player will move. And if we move at this speed, it will move right at about 150 pixels every second. So now, if I run, I'll be able to see the effects of this. I hold down right, and when you look at that, the player's moving. But as it moves off the stage, I can't actually get it back because there's no way of moving it in the opposite direction. So that's what I need to sort out next, being able to move it in the other way. So I'm going to copy and paste this 3 times. and I'm going to change the check for each key on each different segment that we've got here. So I'm going to change this one to left, and instead of moving positively in the X, we're going to move negatively in the X. And instead of right here, I'm going to type down, and instead of moving positively in the X, I'm going to move positively in the Y. And then lastly, I'm going to change this one to up. Instead of moving positively in the X, we're going to move negatively in the Y. So in these 4 different sections of code, we'll basically either change the direction that we're moving in or what we're actually moving, or both. So now when I run this, I should be very capable of being able to move in every direction. And would you look at that? I am. And this has just become a whole lot more interesting. All the possibilities of positions that this player could be in on the screen unfolding before us. But that's not all we have planned for today. There are a few more things in line for us. Now, obviously, this doesn't just apply to these arrow keys, up, left, right, or down. We can apply it to basically any key. So I can type if input.check key.z and then ask to execute some code if Z is being pressed. Now, one thing I'm going to do here is say I want the player to spin around in circles when Z is being pressed. So I'm going to type out graphic as image, just as we've done before, dot angle. Now, angle is a property of the image class. Now, when you change angle, the angle that the image is rotated by also changes. It represents the degrees anti-clockwise the image should be rotated by. So if we want to make it spin around, we have to add to it just like we did with X and Y. So I'm going to add to it 5, just to be consistent with what we've been doing before. And when this runs, we should be able to spin the player around by pressing the Z key. And just like that, we can. And now we can spin around and move, and it's fascinating and extremely interesting. Look at us go. Okay, now, one last thing. Say we didn't want to just check if a key was check if a key is being currently pressed. What if we wanted to check if the key just had been pressed? So rather than constantly checking for it, we only want to check for that initial pressing down, that first bit. Now this is useful in games, for example, when you jump, because when you jump, you press the key, the jump happens, nothing happens after you hold it down. Or for example, if you're in some sort of shooting game and you shoot, depends on the game to be honest, but in a lot of them you don't continue to shoot after that first one. So what if we want to check if it's just been pressed? Well, it's pretty simple. You just change the name of the function. If input.pressed, and we're going to go for space, key.space. This code will be executed when the space key has been pressed. Now we're going to put in some code that is slightly more sophisticated than what we've done before. We're going to make a new variable. So I'm going to go up to the top, up here, and I'm going to make a new variable by typing out public var for variable is big. This is saying, is the player big? And type colon, which then tells me what kind of variable this is. I'm going to say this is of kind Boolean. And a Boolean is just something that's either on or off. True or false, yes or no. Currently, the player isn't big. That's a no, so it's false. It's not true. And what we're going to do with this is when the space key is pressed, toggle is big, and then do something as a result of toggling it. So toggling Boolean variables is quite easy. So you type out the name of it, equals to set it, then an exclamation mark, then the name of the variable again. Basically, this is saying set is big to what is big is not. In this case, if it's false, it will set is big to true. If is big is true, it will set is big to false. And that's a really simple way of doing that. Now after we've set a new value for is big, we can check for that value and then do something as a result of it. So I'm going to type if is big, then we want to do something as a result of that. So I'm going to type out graphic as image dot scale equals 2, because is big is true, so we want to make the graphic bigger. And the scale property is basically a scale factor of the graphic. So if it's 2, it will be twice as big as it was before. If it's 1, it will be a 1-to-1 ratio, exactly the same. Now, if is big is not true, we can say else. Otherwise, graphic as image dot scale equals 1. And that's saying set it to its size that it was before. Then I can hit play, and with any luck, I'll be able to press space, and it'll become big. Press space again, it'll become small. And we've got this awesome little bit of interactivity with our game here. We can make the player bigger, we can rotate it, we can move them around, and it's a toy now. We can actually do something with it. So over the course of today, we've managed to come from a very interesting, just an image on our screen, to a very interesting little toy that is fun to play around with. And that's all we have planned for today. So thank you for tuning in. Keep programming, and I'll see you next time when we cover mouse input as opposed to keyboard input. Thank you.